Hi there. Ice dyeing is a process of using fiber reactive dyes and ice on a natural fiber to create a unique dye technique. So you sprinkle the dye powder onto the ice, and as the ice melts on the surface of the fabric, the dye begins to seep into the fabric, reacts with the surface of the fabric, and then creates a design on your material. And I have several different baby rompers here today that I want to ice dye, and I'll go through that process with you. I also have a little pajama set that's pretty cute, little pair of pants and a long sleeve shirt. The materials and tools you'll need for this are some sort of colander or sieve or something that the water of the ice can drain through without holding water underneath the fabric. So you'll be putting the fabric pieces into your object and then putting the ice on top, and you want the water to drip and flow easily and smoothly through whatever it's sitting on so that it doesn't pool and create blocks of color. So I have this strainer here, and I also have a water tub that I can set it on top of that the water will drain into, and I have that set on a towel just to keep things clean. A dust mask for working with the powders. You'll be working with soda ash fixer as well as Procyon dyes. So having this when you're working on those is nice just for safety's sake, as well as a pair of rubber gloves or plastic gloves here. I have some fiber reactive dyes. I got these from Dharma Trading Company. You can pick whichever colors you want, and you can find fiber reactive dyes online or at the craft store, wherever you normally get your dye materials. I have 2 measuring spoons and a 1 cup measuring cup for the dye and the soda fixer, a bag of soda ash dye fixer. This will help the fabric to absorb the dye, so you'll soak the fabric in this first and then put the dye on top of the material. A stir stick for stirring the soda ash mixture. And I also have a large Rubbermaid tub full of water that I will put the soda ash in and soak the rompers in so that they can absorb the soda ash, so that they'll absorb the dye better. Okay, to soak the rompers in the soda ash mixture, we're going to add 1 cup of soda ash to this bin of water. So I'm going to put in 1 cup here, and then use my stir stick to stir it in. You want the soda ash to dissolve in the water. And once the soda ash is dissolved, you can go ahead and put in your rompers. And you'll just dip them in to get them wet and then stir them around into the mixture. And these will sit in here for 15 minutes, and you'll rotate them around every 3 to 5 minutes to make sure that every area of the fabric is getting coated with the soda ash. After 15 minutes, you'll pull out your outfits and squeeze out excess water. You want to get it so that they're not quite dripping. And then I have a wash tub here that I'm going to set them in so I can transfer them to my work table. Okay, so I have all the wet rompers here. I'm gonna set aside so that I can put my colander or sieve thing into this bin, and then transfer your rompers into your container. And this is where the way you bundle them will determine how much of the dye transfers to the fabric. So bundling them just so that one side's facing up will mean that one side ends up more saturated in color than the other. So holding them up and rolling them up in a bundle, or twisting them, doing something different to orient your material so that the dyes saturate different areas of your piece will make for a more interesting design. And also you can do the same thing you would do for tie-dye with rubber bands or string, or even do a relief where you're putting some sort of shaped clamp onto the fabric to create a shape in the texture of the fabric. But I'm going to put these in like this in kind of bundle form. So I'm folding them up and then rolling them up into a bundle, because we'll be piling the ice on top, and so the color will be scattered anyways. This is, if you're trying to control the outcome of what you want your fabric to look like, this probably isn't the technique to use, because it's very random and it depends on where the ice is, where the dye lands on the ice. Okay, so I basically crumpled all of the fabric, or all of my outfits, into this colander, and I'm ready to pile the ice on top. So pile the ice on top of the rompers, breaking apart any ice that it has stuck together, and you can just pour it on. And try to cover all the fabric. Okay, so that is nice and covered. I have ice covering the whole thing. And this is where you're gonna want your dust mask yet again. So put your dust mask on, and then go to your fiber reactive dyes and choose which colors you want to be on your rompers. Remember that dyes mix as they hit the ice, and so if you have something like a red and a green, it will turn to brown when it mixes. A yellow and a purple, again, turns to brown. But something like yellow and orange would just create something a little bit more yellow-orangey. Or blue and green turns to teal. So you can use colors that mix well, or if you're going to use colors that end up turning brown, use them more conservatively, so that there's less dye, or in areas where they don't touch as much, so that if they do mix, you only have small areas of the brown. Or just go for it and end up with a little bit of brown, and that's totally fine too. So put your mask on, and let's open up some of these dyes. Oh, I also have gloves on, because working with these dyes will end up getting your hands all messy, and I didn't wear gloves and got my fingers all red. So having gloves on at this step is helpful. And I have a little teaspoon here that I'm going to use. So I'm going to start with some Grecian Sea. And again, these are from Dharma Trading Company. You can find links in the description below to all the tools and materials I'm using. Okay, so I'm just going to sprinkle a little bit here and there over the ice. And I have a mental image in my head of where each of the different rompers was that I put in here, because I put so many in one bin. I'm gonna keep track, because I don't want all the colors on all of them. So I'm gonna maybe do a little bit more blue over here. Okay, and then I'm gonna do, I have a burgundy. I'm gonna do some burgundy, and burgundy and blue will end up kind of purpley, so that'll be fun to put next to each other. And you can do this with multiple colors or just using one color. I have even seen an article online where a lady did just black and allowed the different colors in the black dye to split. So she ended up with a beautiful mottled kind of fall colored piece, because black dye is often a combination of multiple different colors. So each grain might be a different color, which then once it hits the fabric shows up as a different color. So there was some reds and some greens and some yellows and copper. Okay, do some bright green over here. So I'm just trying to model the ice with some dye colors so that there's a good saturation of dye over the surface here. And this is hot black. I want to see if I can get maybe some grays out of this one. I'm going to be very cautious with how much of this I use because I don't want it to overwhelm the pieces. Okay, so I'm happy with that amount of dye, and now I'll just let this sit here in the bin and check it every once in a while to make sure the level of the liquid underneath that's dripping through, that it's not so thick that it's starting to saturate the bottom of the fabric, because you don't want it to pool. You don't want the dye to pool in one area, or else you'll end up with big chunks of one color on your pieces, and that's not the point of ice dyeing. So allow your ice to melt completely, and then we'll come back probably in a couple hours and rinse out your pieces and see the outcome. If you like making things and you want to try some fiber arts like basket weaving, natural dyeing, and other things, then be sure to subscribe to my channel so that you get notified whenever I put out a new video. Now the ice has been melting. It's been a little over 24 hours. The ice didn't take that long to melt. It's just taken me that long to get back to it. And I'm going to unwrap these and show you how they turned out. It's looking a little bit gray in some areas, so we'll see what happened here. I'm gonna put my gloves on just because there might be some residual dye and I don't want to turn my hands blue or purple. Okay, so I'll pull this one out and it's still dripping a little bit. So we got some variety of color and a lot of darkness. This is where I used the black dye to see if it would color split. And so there's a lot of dark color in this one. These are fun. We got some stripes and some variety of color here. And after we pull these out, you'll rinse them out in the sink until the water runs clear, and then you can throw these in the wash to rinse out any of the excess dye. So here's another one. And this pattern where you have kind of some variety of color here, this is kind of typical of the ice dyeing where you have a bit of a kaleidoscope effect. Different than tie dyeing where it's more in lines or in streaks. This is tends to be more in blotches. Okay, and the last one. Ooh, and this got some cool floral looking reds here in the red area, and some cool chevron kind of things up here. This is probably the most unique and bright of all of the ones that we did here. And you can see how the colors kind of mixed, and we ended up with a lot of darker areas and some areas that ended up more brown, and that's because we used a kind of a green with the reds. And like I mentioned earlier, the green and the red, that makes some brown spots. So be aware of that when you're picking your colors. Okay, so now go rinse these in some cool water until the water runs clear, and then throw them in the wash and then in a dryer cycle to set the dye. You want the heat to be hot on the dry cycle to set the dye. And then we'll come back and see how these rinsed out and turned out. Our baby clothes came out of the wash and the dry cycle, and you can see the colors have lightened up. They are more of a pastel than when we originally pulled them out of the dye vat. This one got really dark. This is really interesting. This is the black dye. These darker spots here turned more gray, and you can see a ton of green and yellow in this area where the colors split, like we were talking about, the black splitting into multiple colors. That definitely happened in here. We got a lot of moody dark colors. And this shirt goes with these pants, which are a lot brighter. So we have a bit of a move from coming up with the brighter colors up the legs, and then at the bottom of the shirt, and going into the moodier colors at the top of the shirt. So that's kind of a fun look. And then this guy showing lots of different colors, and this typical kind of orchid looking pattern here from the Einstein, and some fun color mixing in the sleeve. And each side is different because it's the way they were folded. Again, here, this is where the fabric was folded up, and so you got kind of a mirror image print there. And then this one is really fun with the bright, bold colors here in contrasting with the deeper blues and kind of the gray, the black color, and some fun movement around the collar, and then the brighter pops of color in the legs. These really remind me of flower petals, all of these different modeled pops of color, just how watery they look, and the way that it blends, and then the way that there's just a little bit of mixture of color here, kind of some purple with the pink. So these turned out pretty fun. You can definitely control the colors a little bit more if you use one color or one or two colors that blend together. So like a blue and a red, those mix together to make purple. So you'll get more of a controlled 3-color kind of finish. These, having used so many colors and with the color splitting of the dyes, we ended up with a ton of colors. So they look very kaleidoscopy, which is fun. So I hope you try your own on some baby clothes or some kids' clothes. Make sure you use a cotton, linen, a natural fiber of some sort, wool, cotton, linen, silk, hemp, something like that, because that's what the fiber reactive dye will respond to. Check the links in the description below for all the tools and resources and where to find those. And I'll see you next time. Thanks for watching.